just back to the beginning, because we're here to talk about interaction and collaboration in small groups. Why I'm so concerned about it is in the MBT program, they're all part-time. There are no full-time students. So obviously they do have those issues with so many other commitments. So promoting that engagement is such a big issue for us. Distance students comprise 80% of the student cohort. There's only ever one face-to-face class run for a particular course at one time, which means that there are obviously feelings of alienation and isolation for the distance students. Now, I have distance students. I've got one in Dubai right now. I've got one in South Africa working in a mine, and he got an extension because apparently the mine collapsed, and so it's the best excuse I've ever had for a late submission. As Andrew was saying earlier, that MBT students have a wealth of experience, but don't necessarily have the educational background. So what they like to do is that this is something that I've found in my face-to-face and online classes. They say, what I get out of it the most is being able to exchange stories with people from different working backgrounds and compare my workplace with what's going on at yours. So that's something, especially when we talk about conflict management, that's a really big issue, and sharing stories like, oh, I've got my subordinate does this and mine does that. So the sharing of the stories is really important for us. So what I'm going to talk about are the different types of teaching strategies that I use. And then afterwards, like I said, I will talk about their varying degrees of success across semesters. So when it's run face-to-face, the question is provided a week before. As I was saying to the group over here, one of the questions I use when we discuss leadership theory is, great leaders are born and not made. So they spend a week researching that question, come into class, and on the day, I put them into groups. So they needed to have prepared both points before they come to class. So even when we do even when I do a face-to-face debate, what we do at the end is that each team is appointed someone to post their arguments online afterwards. So someone from the jury will say, these are the points and counterpoints that we discussed. The affirmative will post theirs. So there is actually a record, there is a record of what each argument was. Distance. There is actually, when we're currently using WebTeach, and I don't want to emphasise WebTeach too much because I know most of us use Vista, but students pick their own side based on what arguments they find most compelling. There's a debate function where they say, I'm for or against this proposition, and go from there. So as the debate goes on, if I see everyone's picking one side, then I encourage people to take the opposing side. And again, like you were saying, that there's a full record of everyone's arguments that they can go back and reflect on. I'm happy for anyone to ask me any questions during the presentation as well. I don't want to... Yes, of course.
Because I was just thinking about when you were saying that people get to choose. I personally have found that, or my experience has been, that when you don't get to choose that, in other words, you have to debate the argument rather than your emotional attachment to it, that there's a lot to be learned from that, rather than taking a side that you already have some sort of opinion.
Yeah. Well, I will explain that with the WebTeach function, I don't want to talk about it too much. There's actually a difference between informal and formal debating. And informal debates, you allocate teams. But with informal, it's just what do I agree with and why.
So it's having that as a difference.
Yeah. So you can actually do both. So why it's been a useful tool, because they engage with each other now. I barely said a thing. I probably could have jumped in more and said, why don't you do this? Why don't you say that? But I've found that when I've been directing it too much, then everyone looks towards me and says, have I said enough, or who goes next? So I usually find that it works better if it's a bit more organic and if I don't speak that much. It allows a broad treatment of an issue or topic, but it depends on the nature of the topic. It's directly related to the argument, to the exam as well, because in the first part of the exam, every single semester is, please assess the arguments and counter-arguments on this proposition. So it's something that they can actually see what the outcome of this learning activity is, and that's usually reflected back in positive comments in my feedback. So the benefits of it face-to-face, obviously it's instantaneous and you can have those organic arguments that just sprout up. But online, it's a lot more democratic. Instead of having the dominant people that everyone, you can see that certain people rise to debate, and I know in class you always have those dominant people that always have something to say, but with the online function it is a lot more democratic. But the problems with that is that if the debate is bubbling up too well, if someone's a bit late to jump in because they've been caught up with work or something like that, then they don't feel like they've made a very good contribution. So obviously debates can work either way. Before I move on, any questions about debating as a teaching strategy? Yes?
Have you tried just going around the class and saying 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 to divide them into
Yeah, absolutely.
affirmative, negative, and do you get a different response to if you just ask for volunteers to do the affirmative, volunteers to do the negative?
No, I usually allocate because volunteers, no one really volunteers. And you'll find that generally with something like great leaders are born and not made, most of the class will believe one particular thing or the other. So I find that just to avoid it, usually I just allocate groups. The way I ran it probably wasn't the most effective way to teach it, to explain it as a teaching tool, but it was just to show that if you get a group of people talking about something, the ideas will just fire and it can get that discussion going. And when you do it at the beginning of the semester, I find that it's a really great way to form that unity in a classroom.
Do you actually assess student performance or?
Yes, we do. In terms of whether they are vocal in the debate as well, because we have student participation marks in that particular class. It's not too hard and fast on this is an assessment task, but it's more about, like I said, interaction and collaboration rather than assessing their knowledge. So breakout groups, these are quite common to be used in class where you just allocate people into little groups and send them off into a corner or send them off into another room to discuss a topic. We also use this online where you set up private activities for groups to go and discuss an issue by themselves, and then the rest of the class doesn't see their responses till later. I will talk about this a little bit later, but I used to swear to breakout groups being a fantastic tool online. I thought they were, for 2 semesters, it just went with roaring success, and I'm doing it now and it's falling flat as a tack. And I'm not entirely too sure why. I don't want to just blame the student cohort because that's too easy, but I'm not entirely too sure, and maybe if you can give me some suggestions when I talk about some of the comments that I have got about breakout groups a little bit later. So obviously, even in small classes, having even smaller groups are a great tool. Even if you've just got 3 people, because in a group of 10, you'll find that even 1 or 2 don't want to speak. So giving the option of people to form closer relationships with each other is a good idea. Usually in breakout groups as well, I don't give people the same question, I give them different questions. So they feel like they do need to come back and contribute, because if you give them the same question, then inevitably the other group will say, well, what they said. Sophie's going to be talking about case studies, and she's the expert on case studies, so I won't talk too much about using case studies, and I'm sure this is something that varies considerably according to faculty. For example, in psychology or medicine, your case studies are very different to our case studies from Harvard, so I think Sophie will talk a bit more about it.
So I'm the expert on that.
Well,
I'll talk about it.
yeah. So with case studies as well, in class, they're always given the preparation. With the online teaching as well, we set up a discussion for 2 weeks. We'll say this is the 2-week discussion period for Unit 8, and we are discussing this case study. So they inevitably take the time, faff about it a little bit, and then come back online to discuss it. Whereas face-to-face, I have the opportunity to say to them, this is what we're doing next week, so prepare. But I could do that online, and I have tried to do that and say, next week, this is what we're preparing for, but I've found that they get too distracted with having to deal with this one task while I'm telling them, do this, but get ready for that. But at the end of a face-to-face class, you can easily say, see you next week, we're doing the case study, make sure you've read it, and that's enough. So that's a challenge that I'm finding with the online classes using case studies. because having it sprung on them, and it takes them a little bit longer to develop their engagement in this area. In the MBT program, we place an emphasis on practical and scholarly, and practical tools. Well, tools that are practical is a strong emphasis, because every single student of mine, when we start face-to-face or online, what are your aims and outcomes for this course? Inevitably, it is, I want to go back at work and be a better manager. I want to walk into work tomorrow and be a better leader when we're talking about leadership theory. So I don't know if their expectations are too high, but there is such an emphasis on this practical component in the MBT program. Now, I also teach in the MCOM program, and that isn't as common because they're all full-time. They think, I'll wait till the end of my degree when I worry about, you know, doing the practical implementation of my knowledge. So the way exercises are structured in the MCOM program are very different to the way I structure them in the MBT program because of that. Because I need to infuse it with an element of, you can take this knowledge away and implement it right now. Or, here's the theory, now let's talk about how we can have the practical component integrated into it. The benefits, obviously, of face-to-face is that you have the ability to monitor. I'm having a problem this semester with reticent students of just not wanting to log in and discuss. I've sent them emails saying, hi, how are you going? What's going on in your life? I know we all have something, but there will always be something, so please log on. But it's difficult to point at someone online virtually and say, please say something, whereas face-to-face, we know how easy it is to target non-participants. What are your thoughts about this? Is this something that anyone else is?
I'm actually having exactly that problem, and that's why I'm thinking, I don't know who the students are, but whether there's becoming a tiredness about it, like whether people are tiring of this, having to constantly be getting online. I don't know. I'm just asking a question.
Look, it's dropped off in previous...
I've sent emails and put posts up and smiled a lot.
We have the same issue face to face though, because in medicine we have to enforce fairly heavily an 80% attendance rule. Otherwise, people sort of the small group sessions, they sometimes don't come.
Because they're so small.
Yeah, that's right. And they say, well, you know, that's about me talking. I want to go and hear the lecturer. You know, that sort of stuff. So it's the same issue, I think, but on both sides. They don't necessarily see the advantage of the interaction.
But I think just in the medicine context as well, when you were talking about breakout groups, what happens, we start off with small groups and they go into breakout groups and everything's fine, but inevitably after a year or even a shorter time, they will go, oh no, can't we just do it as a group? And my colleagues have done it as well. That is a very consistent finding that they start to go, can't we just do it as a whole group? We don't want to break out.
Well, that's what I've been doing in this semester, because breakout groups have worked fantastically for me before, and I thought, great, I'm going to do it again. First time, it didn't work at all, and I was actually too scared to do it for another couple of weeks. And I thought, okay, let's give it another shot. Maybe it was just the questions. Maybe it, I don't know, because there was an assessment coming up. So I've tried it again, and it's gotten a little better, but they still want to have that group discussion, and that's something that I've had to vary according to the student cohort, because I'll talk about my cat-eye feedback, and they raved about the breakout groups at first, and now I've been getting emails saying, we've done it once and don't want to do it again.
I don't want to come to work every day, but I have to.
Yeah, well,
I think that's part of what it's about, because in a breakout group there's responsibility. You have to work,
turn up.
you have to do things, you can't hide. Whereas in the larger group, it gets easier and easier to hide.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what it's about. It's about people ducking the engagement in the end, even though they might think it's a good idea, but there's also reluctance.
And I remember when I first started teaching postgraduate students, I thought they were going to be so much more motivated and come into, I mean, well, like I say, I was transitioning from undergraduate, and then when I thought, but you're paying your own money to do this, and this is leadership stuff, and you're a leader. Don't you want to be a better manager? Why aren't you doing this? And then this is why I've been looking at different strategies, because it wasn't as easy as I thought it was. And now, a few years down the track, I think I'm getting a lot better, because I've just got different tools to pull out when I can see groups aren't working. What else have I got?
I think a terrible generalisation is that postgraduate people underestimate the commitment.
Yeah.
You know, how to address that I don't know, but they always hit the deck sort of very enthusiastic, and then life unravels over 12 weeks, and that's the first sort of stuff that drops off, you know.
But it also comes back to value, something that was raised very early on, that these breakout groups, if they're saying, I don't want it anymore, we've done that, what they're really saying is, I didn't get enough value out of it to give my time, which is very precious. I've run clinical imaging master's course for a few years and had the troubles with answering emails and even opening up WebCT. Didn't want anything via WebCT, just send it to us as by email. That's all I look at once I come home from work, right? They're really wanting value with a massive red dollar sign on it every time we open our mouths.
I know I don't have the answer. I don't know if anyone else can tell me what the answer is. But I think it is about understanding, getting to know our students, finding out what their expectations are, probably being a bit more upfront when they come in. This is what your expectations are, and that's something that I've had to do as well. I'm patrolling online a lot more heavily than I used to. I used to think, well, if you're not going to participate, then that's your own fault. But I've actually had to get a lot more involved and say, this is how I will be assessing you. Halfway through the semester, I actually send them individual participation feedback and give them Bloom's taxonomy and say, this is where I see you. This is how you can develop further. And because they know that I'm onto them, then that's worked a bit more, but again, it takes extra effort. Users is quite an effective tool where people can log on and just throw their ideas out there without having their identity attached to it. I've even tried this face-to-face by saying everyone write down something on a piece of paper and we'll pull it out of a hat, and that can be the anonymous brainstorm. We have quiz releases as well, where everyone submits their answers, and then finally I release all the answers so you can see how you've responded compared to how the rest of the class has responded, and I found that to be quite good. But because we're in a business school and we teach things like negotiation, having the role plays and having that physical interaction is fantastic. And as I was saying to the group up the back, teaching negotiation and the importance of body language in negotiation virtually is really difficult. And I'm still working on ways to get through that. So I'll just move on quickly to the feedback that I've received about the different strategies. So group work, like I said, it was fantastic. All the participation exercises went well, but then again, one person said, less emphasis, it was too overdone, and someone said, we want more. So you can never satisfy everyone. But are some strategies more effective than others? In this situation, group work really shone. The breakout groups really shone as something that they responded to. So then we had a pilot program of WebCT in session 2 last year. Group work was more difficult to manage because we couldn't have that private function. And I would set up a thread saying group 1 includes boom, boom, boom. And they talk about it that way, but there was that feeling of anyone can monitor my discussions, there's no privacy. And that's something that came back to me in just an informal chat post saying, how are you working with the groups? And they're saying, oh, it's not as private as we thought it would be. And obviously, I know I don't have the answer. I don't know if anyone else can tell me what the answer is. But I think it is about understanding, getting to know our students, finding out what their expectations are, probably being a bit more upfront when they come in. This is what your expectations are, and that's something that I've had to do as well. I'm patrolling online a lot more heavily than I used to. I used to think, well, if you're not going to participate, then that's your own fault. But I've actually had to get a lot more involved and say, this is how I will be assessing you. Halfway through the semester, I actually send them individual participation feedback and give them Bloom's taxonomy and say, this is where I see you. This is how you can develop further. And because they know that I'm onto them, then that's worked a bit more. But again, it takes extra effort. And I did that halfway through as well. I gave them independent feedback in class and halfway through. But again, knowing that these things are things I can improve on, even different ways to do it, because clearly I was doing it, but it didn't stand out to them. So now I'm back on WebTeach. And here are the submission rates according to different group activity. We have the same amount of students now. I think there was 16 in session 1 last year, and now I'm only in 15, so there only really is one. So from the outset, the level of engagement hasn't really been there.
Is the number of students the same?
1 to 2 difference, yeah, I think we're down to 6, I think it was 16. So the reason is difficulty keeping up with workload. People have said they enjoyed the debate, so I've run another one. And again, I had one saying, I found the groups somewhat completely pointless as no one participated. So, which is the reason why in session 1 last year I had breakout groups, but I went back to group discussion. Now, I know I'm probably going to get killed in cat-eye with not having group work, but if they're not going to engage with it, then really, what am I going to do? So we still have, and this one here is that we have a 2-week discussion period, and these are the rates right now after 1 week. So it's pretty much double than what it was in session 1 last year. So this is something that I'm reflecting back on, thinking, why is the same activity not working across 2 different cohorts? And that's something that bothers me.
Can you maybe look at this a different tangent and ask the students, maybe fairly early in session, as part of their profile to identify for you how many hours a week work they do, how many hours a week family commitments they have and that. And you might just happen to find that this year's group is, in one of the binomial distribution tales of human mankind, where they're the really busy ones, and they literally don't have the time, and it's just a sampling issue that happens to have hit you, but you sort of getting an indirect indicator of their time availability to contribute, which might be quite independent of their intentions.
Oh look, absolutely. But again, that's something I can't control. I can control what I'm doing.
No, but you can't control it, but
well,
maybe you can understand, and then
I have
it
a tendency
gives you a way of explaining perhaps what might be a reason behind it.
Probably, but I have a tendency to look towards myself, my own teaching abilities first before asking the students what's going on. And probably because it very well could be something beyond my control, but I can't be accountable for those things. I can only be accountable for what I'm doing.
You're saying the onus should be on the teacher, and what about having this the concept we've had mentioned of the learning contract? So really the student is not fulfilling their part of the contract, and it's not your fault.
You talked about a large induction program, and ignorantly I don't know how much that means, but somewhere in that you tell them I need at least this many hours.
Look, at the beginning when I do my introduction, I tell them exactly how. I even did a YouTube message saying this is how you can get the most out of the course. I set up my own channel saying, here I am, you never get to meet me because you're over in Dubai. Saying, post frequently, post often. This is how I am assessing your participation. I'm looking at whether you make a comment, whether you reflect on other students' experiences. Once a week is sufficient, however, to achieve a mark of a distinction or above, you should be posting more than, probably 2 times and giving, interesting, insightful comments. So hopefully I've shared a couple of different strategies with you and given my reflections about my challenges that I've had, and hopefully you can learn from them. Any questions, comments, please let me know. I'll be sticking around to see and learn from Sophie as well. So thank you.
So we actually have a